Being a PhD researcher is a bit like being a detective. I'm a big fan of Sherlock Holmes and Inspector Morse. It's curiosity that drives the detective to resolve a case. And it's curiosity, I believe, that makes for an intrepid researcher. I grew up in India, and I never learnt anything at school about India's involvement in the Second World War. To me, this was the white man's war, fought many thousands of miles away. The Indian Second World War experience has lived very much in the private domain. My curiosity led me to open up and investigate this space. Imagine my surprise when I realized that 2.5 million men from undivided India served in the Second World War for the British. The 1940s are a very charged time for undivided India. It's the time when the British Empire is facing its strongest resistance from the Indian people. So on one hand, you have non-violence resistance movements led by people like Gandhi. On the other hand, you have the armed resistance to the British being led by Subhash Chandra Bose. So in order to recover the lives and narratives of these millions of soldiers, I'm having to look at a range of archives. The British Library is a massive treasure trove. It's got so many useful things in there for me. The Imperial War Museum, where we are today, is also an incredible resource for me because it has interviews of some soldiers who were formerly part of the British Indian Army, but also I'm equally interested in the visual records. So how were the soldiers represented in photographs, pamphlets, posters, leaflets? With the visual and the written, I think we can bring together a fuller picture of the Indian War experience.
These ones show a sort of dance and sporting event that was, I think, primarily hosted by the Indian Army, but you can see the interaction between the Indian troops and the British there as well.
Did Indian soldiers identify with the British aims of war? How did they live and love in these new and foreign lands, considering they were sent to practically every single theatre of war? The Middle East, North Africa, Greece, Italy, Burma. One of the accounts I found particularly moving is of an Indian doctor who was imprisoned in France at the start of the war and then is transferred to 17 prisoner of war camps before he's finally taken to Colditz Castle in the heart of Hitler's Third Reich.
It was funny for me. I was the only Easterner there, and they were all Englishmen, Dutch and others. They had the food, but they wouldn't share it. I couldn't believe my eyes. All I heard was the click of the key as the door shut. I was, to say the least, miserable and lost.
Recovering these lives and narratives is making me realize what the lived experience of these soldiers were so far away from home. They weren't just imperial soldiers in a colonial army. They were fathers, husbands, brothers and lovers in these terrible and traumatic times.